Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Friday morning and another Figured 101 webinar. I'll just give it a couple of minutes for everyone to get into the webinar and join us. We're looking at setting up actuals today. So if you joined us last week, we went through the basics of Figured 101, the now, where, how mentality of thinking with Figured, and how that works in the product. And this week we're digging into that a little further, looking at the now steps and looking at setting up actuals. We'll dive into the Xero side of it initially, just to go through some setup steps there in Xero and some key points with getting Xero set up and ready for Figured. And then we'll dive into the now product within Figured. So how are we looking at getting a accurate picture of where we are now as a business. So I'll just give it another minute or two. Head back to the start there, just to see if we'll get everyone into the webinar before we kick off. If you've got any questions during the webinar, feel free to fire it through the chat function there and or the Q&A function within Zoom, and we'll get to those at the Q&A at the end. And also, as always, you can use the green chat bubble on the Figured website or in the Figured product as well to reach out to us. And it's usually myself or Nick in the UK here in the UK time zone, but obviously we've got teams around the world. So yeah, should always be someone online to get to your questions there. Awesome. So it looks like we've got everyone that's coming in for today. So we'll kick off now and get into the product. So you've got myself here, Paddy Terry, for those of you who don't know. I'm the customer success specialist here in the UK, and also in the UK team we've got James Higgy, who's the channel lead here, and Nick Barakoff is our partner success manager. So feel free to reach out to any of us if you've got any questions or anything. Before we kick off, I'll just touch on this point here as well. So if you're ever in the product and you need any support, we've got the green chat bubble is a great place to start. So that's reaching out to any of us in the product. It's usually myself and Nick on this side of the world, as I mentioned, but there's also teams around the world if you need any support there. We've also got the help center in Figured as well, which is really useful. There's some really great articles in there on specific areas of the product. And if you've got any burning questions in there, that's a good place to start. That's also available through that green chat bubble there, or at the URL there on the screen. Also, this webinar and the previous webinars will be hosted on the Figured YouTube channel, which is obviously on YouTube there. So that link there. So there's some great webinars that dig into deeper into some of the products and some of the features of the product that we'll be going through today and in the previous webinars. So that's a great place to check out as well if you're learning the product. And also the Figured blog there as well. It's got some great user stories and some key insights into feature releases and some great support articles there. So another great place to check out. So today, this is the agenda of what we'll be going through. I'll do a quick recap of the now, where, how for anyone that wasn't here at the last webinar, and just go over that mentality of using now, where, how to go through the Figured product. Then we'll touch on getting Xero ready for Figured. So obviously Xero is a really key point in using Figured. So we'll touch on getting the key points of Xero set up and ready for Figured. Then we'll dive into the Figured side, go through some of the production tracking there and the key points around there. And then we'll touch on the allocator and setting allocation rules, which again is really key for those actuals. And then we'll dive into some reports at the end and look at some of those really popular reports and the features within Figured reporting. And at the end, if you've got any questions, we'll have a Q&A there. So just to recap on the now, where, how mentality of, or the school of thought that we like to track through Figured here. But the first one is understanding the now. So that's where we're really looking at the actuals, which is what we're touching on and what we're looking at today, is really getting an accurate understanding of where the business is now. So we use our trackers for that. So keeping our production up to date so that we know what we're producing and how much it's costing us to produce. By merging that production with the actuals that are flowing through from Xero. So Xero is our point of truth there, and then we combine those zeros, those actuals from Xero in Figured with our production through those trackers. We touched on last week on the where as well. So that's using the scenarios tool, mapping out where we want to be in the future, say 5 to 10 years in the future, just using a high level annualized plan built from a base of Xero actuals. And we're mapping out where we want to be in the future, or where we're going to be in the future, and how do we get there as the next step. So that's where we looked at using the planning grid to dig down into that where plan that we made and work out how are we actually going to get to where we want to be. So this is using the planning grid again to dig into those monthly forecasts and monthly planning that sit alongside your Xero actuals there, and just let us track our actuals against the plan to make sure we're heading in the right direction to get to where we want to be. So that's sort of the 3 steps of using Figured there: understanding the now, where we are at now, working out where we're going to be in the future, or where we want to be, and then looking at how we're going to get to that place that we want to be in the future. So the first step here is looking at Xero, because Xero is our point of truth. Xero is our central point of information there, and that's where we get all of our actuals from. And what actuals are actually just our previous transactions. They are actual transactions that have actually happened. So we take all of that from Xero, but Xero doesn't have that agri-specific information in there. So they don't. Xero doesn't know what cows' litres or harvests are. They don't take that into consideration. So that's where we use Figured to provide that agricultural specific lens. I like to think of Xero as the central hub, and Figured as a layer around Xero that we use to get a more agri-specific lens on that information that we've got in there, and then we build on that information into the future through our forecast, which we'll touch on in the later webinars. So actuals are our financial transactions. They come from Xero. And in Figured, we merge those actuals, those financial transactions from Xero with our production in Figured. And then we turn that into reports that we can use to drive decision-making on farms. So some of the key changes to make to Xero. Initially, this is a great place to start when we're initially getting set up. So the chart of accounts is the first place to start, and that's really, really important for using Figured and Xero. So we have a chart of accounts that we can use in Figured. We have a pre-set chart of accounts that you're welcome to use. They're located in the Help Center. But if you've already got a chart of accounts, that's fine too. We can just make some minor adaptations because the way we work with Xero is we track through the livestock trackers and the other trackers through our accounts that map back to Xero. So really important to have the correct account set up in Xero to ensure that we're using the trackers properly. The other option here is to create tracking options for our crop seasons. So in Xero, we'll touch on this again shortly, but we can create tracking options within Xero through the Xero tracking categories for our crop seasons, which will allow us to automate a lot of the allocation work that comes through the transactions from Xero, and in Figured that'll automate a lot of the allocation out to those crop seasons. So we don't have to manually do that. But again, we'll touch on that shortly. The last one here is the options for having a multi-farm. So multi-farm, for those who don't know, is a feature within Figured that allows us to split a Xero file into a single Xero file into multiple farms within Figured. And we can budget and report and track separately on each of those farms, and then also view that in a consolidated view as well. And for that's for those who want to really get a more accurate picture of those individual farms or individual enterprises and keep them separated. So important to create tracking options in Xero, because that's what will determine the farms that are laid out in Figured. So adding new Xero accounts is the key to setting up your chart of accounts here. It's actually really easy. We head into accounting and then into advanced, and that's where you'll find your chart of accounts. You can import a chart of accounts into Xero. So if you wanted to use the figured chart of accounts, again, it's available in the Figured Help Center. We can pick out the pieces from it that we need to use because it's quite a comprehensive chart of accounts. It covers all the bases. So we'd just pick out probably the key points we want to use from there, and then we can import that into Xero. Again, recommend you chat to your accountant before you go changing this because it does have rather large repercussions for your both Xero and your figured file. So tracking operations is how we link to the crop seasons here from Xero. So in Xero, we can set up tracking categories, and you can have 2 tracking categories in Xero. And then within those tracking categories, we have category tracking options within them, which are the category options you can see on the screen there. So if we were linking to our crops, we'd set up a category called enterprises perhaps, or arable, and then we would create options underneath that would we can then assign or allocate invoices to those category options, which will then flow through and automate automatically within Figured. So we would set options up for each of our crops if we wanted to assign those invoices or those transactions in Xero and have them automatically allocated within Figured. The multi-farm is the last piece here that we briefly touched on. So this is where we, similar to the crops that we would have in the previous slide, but this one is setting up farms. So the tracking category would be called farms or enterprises or whatever we want to call it. But underneath that, the options that we've got there would set up separate farms within Figured. So here you can see I've got a brewery, I've got three farms in there, and then some holiday lets. And so each of those would essentially operate as a separate Figured file that we could budget, report on, and track the production on separately. And then we can also view them as a consolidated enterprise, consolidated business within Figured as well. But it's just for really splitting it out into those enterprises and getting that detail in there if need be. Linking Figured to Xero is really easy. If for those of you who haven't done it before, it's just a matter of heading to Figured and registering. So myfigured.com, registering if you haven't already done that. Click the Create Farm button up there and follow the steps. There's some really simple steps there that you're just entering some basic farm information. Then you'll come to this step here, which is the final step, which we connect our Xero file to Figured. So clicking connect to Xero will take you back to Xero. You'll select the Xero file, and then Figured will start pulling through all of your chart of accounts and all of your journals. It's important to note that the first one there will take a little while. It's pulling all of your Xero information across, but Figured and Xero are constantly syncing automatically to pull through all of your data and make sure we've got those really accurate, up-to-date actuals flowing through to your Figured file. Cool, so we'll dive into the Figured product now. So production trackers are the first point to dive off into here. So we've got multiple production trackers in Figured, multiple types here. Livestock is the first one to touch on. So we've got multiple types of livestock here: beef, dairy, sheep, pigs, and those cover the main livestock production there that we've got. Each of them has their own set of stock classes, which we'll touch on soon. But yeah, there's multiple there for your different livestock enterprises. For arable, we've got our crop season trackers. So each of your crops that you've got growing in the ground will have its own tracker to really break down that profitability. The product tracker is our inventory management tool. So any of your harvests from your crop seasons will flow into your product tracker. And we also manage our inputs for crops there as well. So the product tracker and the crop seasons are really key, work together there in partnership. We've got the milk tracker as well, which obviously manages your milk income and your production. And then we've also got generic trackers there for anything else that we've got on farm that we'd like to create a cost center for. So anything that's not covered by those other trackers there. We've got a generic tracker which we can use to manage anything else. So it might be any reusable energy, or a rental there, as we've got there, anything that we want to create a cost center for and assign costs and income to produce a gross margin, we can create that generic tracker. We'll be touching on the three main trackers today, so the livestock, crop seasons, and the product tracker. So starting off with livestock, for those of you who haven't seen the livestock tracker before, this is an example of one, of a dairy cattle tracker. You'll have a single tracker for each operation you've got on farm. So each livestock operation you've got, be it dairy cattle, pigs, beef cattle, whether it might be young stock or breeding, you'll have a single tracker for those, and those we reuse those trackers year on year. So we don't create a new one like we do with crop seasons, which we'll see soon. So this is a single tracker that we continue using year on year. We use stock classes there to group the animals. So as you can see, I'm using my heifer age groups in this example here. And then I've got breeding bulls and dairy cows as well. The reason we use stock classes is we're not tracking individual animals, because we're really focused on the financial side of this, being a financial management tool. So we group them animals into these groups to assign a valuation to that group, which in turn, keeping our stock rate up to date here, will drive our livestock valuations. We've got two-way transactions with Xero through these trackers as well. So what that means is, with the two-way integration that Figured's got with Xero, we obviously pull all of the Xero transactions from Xero into Figured, but we also have the option to push transactions back through to Xero as well. So through the livestock trackers, we would encourage you to create actual transactions through the livestock trackers, assign all the agri-specific details to them, like weights and any additional agri-specific information that Xero doesn't hold, we can assign that in Figured, and then we push that information through to Xero to create those invoices in Xero. The other way to work is from Xero through to Figured, where your livestock invoices will come into Xero and pull through Figured. But because Xero doesn't have that agri-specific information, when that transaction arrives at Figured, we just need to hop back into Figured and enter some information that's relevant to that particular transaction, particularly a quantity which will populate our stock rec. So this is some of the setup here at the top here for the livestock trackers that we've got. You can see here we've got some stock classes there. The ones with the little blue padlock next to them means we've already got transactions against them. So you can select whatever stock classes you want to use in the livestock trackers. You don't have to use them all. You can just use one if you want to. It's really up to you. But for each one that you use, you would set up a sale account and a purchase account, which is a revenue for the sales in Xero and an expense account for the purchases in Xero. So we then assign those accounts to each stock class there, as you can see I've done with my heifers here. And that means we can track the stock movements between Figured and Xero. So that's key for getting your chart of accounts set up there in Xero, as we touched on before, because we really need to have these accounts set up in Xero before we go to Figured to set up our trackers, so that we can assign those accounts in there and get that set up. Down the bottom here, we've got the stock balancer, which is another feature of the livestock trackers. This is a end of year reconciliation tool, but it doesn't, obviously you can use it at any point to reconcile. Basically what we can do is put in our target closing amounts, and then really quickly and easily enter reconciling transactions for any of the stock movements that we've got in there, be it births, purchases, aging, sales, deaths, or just reconciling transactions. So a really quick and easy tool to see what we need to reconcile and really quickly and easily do it. Crop seasons are the next tracker we've got here. So these are our arable trackers. This is an example of a winter wheat 21 tracker that we can see here. So you'll have one tracker for each crop type you put into the ground, essentially. So different to the livestock trackers where we're carrying them on year, each one of these trackers is assigned to a single crop. So for example, my winter wheat 2021, this tracker is just for that 2021 crop, and then if we're planting winter wheat again in 22, we'll have a separate tracker for that. At the top here, we've got some key KPIs based on profit on the left here. So we've got our budget or our annual plan there. We've then got our actual and our forecast and the variance between the two. And then we've got a market price there, which I'll touch on when we get into the product. We record harvests through these trackers as well. So that's how we set our estimated income. So we'd set harvests in here, which give us our production, our yield, and our total production, which populates our inventory tracker, which is our product tracker there. And then we head into the product tracker, which is where we see the movements of that, and we'll touch on that shortly. The other thing, that this is where we tag those, this is where the invoices that we've tagged in Xero would flow through to. So for example, if we tag the seeds invoices down the bottom there, they would automatically be allocated through the allocator and to this particular crop season, had we tagged it winter wheat 21 in Xero. So again, utilizing those tracking options in Xero is really helpful for getting those costs into the trackers. But all the costs and other income, the majority of those costs will come through the allocator, which again we'll look at shortly. But they'll come from Xero through to the allocator, which we will then allocate to the relevant crop seasons. The product tracker works hand in hand with those crop seasons. So this is our inventory warehouse where we'd manage both all of our inputs into the crops. So we've got some fertilizer in there, as you can see, some sprays, but also the outputs as well. So a wheat grain is in there, and a wheat straw as well. So anything that we've harvested flows in here. And we can see underneath that, we've got the movements there. So I've got some harvests and some sales in there. So we've got our historic movements in there, or our actuals, and then we've got our forecast movements in there as well. We'll get a valuation of all of those products that we've got, so an average price per unit up there, and then the total valuation that we've got on hand, which is really, really handy for accounting. And the movement types we've got there will be our harvest from our crop seasons. So the harvest will show in here, which populates our quantity on hand. We'll have sales of those harvests in here as well. We've got used for seed and used for feed functions, which allows us to allocate any harvest that we've got to use for seed, for planting new crops, or use for feed, for feeding our animals. We've then got applications in here as well, so we can apply products to crops. So we can apply our fertilizers out of here. If we're just using a certain amount of our fertilizer, perhaps we've got 120 tons of phosphate in there, we might just be using 40 tons of that. So we can allocate that to our winter wheat if necessary out of here. And then we've got purchases of products as well, so we can buy products from the product tracker. So we can buy fertilizers, we can buy sprays, anything out of here as well. So really key to use this product tracker hand in hand with those crop seasons to manage the inventory. So we've mentioned the allocator a couple of times, but this is a really, really powerful tool for our gross margin reporting and our cost of production reporting there as well. So all of your Xero transactions will come through the allocator. That's what's flowing through on the left there. And then when it gets into figured, this is how it appears, and we can split those transactions out and allocate them to particular crop seasons, or we can allocate them to any trackers actually. So up there, I'm allocating my casual labour there, Jim's labour. We're allocating that at a 50-50 split between my dairy cattle and my beef cattle enterprises. So that's assigning splitting that transaction in half and assigning that half of those transactions to each of those enterprises to work out that gross margin and that cost of production there for our dairy and our beef. So we've also got the option in there, which you won't see in the livestock example, but when we get into the product, I'll show you. We've got the option to allocate to field level there for the crop seasons as well. It's an option. It doesn't have to be utilized, but if you did want to allocate to the field level and split that out on a field level basis to get that really accurate field level analysis, that option is there as well. So the allocator is a really powerful tool for getting those costs and income into the correct enterprises and really driving the accuracy of our reporting. So we'll just check out some of the reports as well while we're here, because this is where we're displaying that information that we've been working on within Figured through those trackers, through the allocator. So reports are how we're displaying that information. And Figured's got a real ethos of collaboration on these reports. So we can save the reports. And this one here is an example of a saved report, and we can leave comments and annotations on these reports to share with others within the farming team and outside the business if need be. So we've got gross margin reports in Figured for driving, really looking at profit of enterprises and of the business as a whole. We've got production reports in there as well, which are probably my personal favorites, looking at different metrics like sort of how much we're spending per hectare, how much we're spending per cow or per unit of production to produce that amount. So they're really key for understanding where you're spending your money. We've got really fast variance analysis reports in there as well, which are probably the most popular report in Figured globally. And this is an example of one here. And that just allows us to compare different periods and really track how we're going on our business against different periods. So again, we can compare last year's actuals, last year's plans. There's a lot of additional options in these variance reports, and best you probably check it out yourself. But when we're in the product, I'll take you through it quickly, and we can have a look at some of those options we've got in there. Today we'll just be focusing on the three most popular reports because there's just too much to cover in one webinar. So we'll be looking at the profit and loss report there, the cash flow, and the variance report that we've just mentioned. So we'll dive into the product now. 1 second here. So we'll have a quick look at Xero first while we're here. Cool. So this is my demo Xero file that we've got here. So just to cover some of the things that we mentioned in the slides there. So adding our chart of accounts is probably the first step that we'd want to go to. So we click on accounting up here in Xero, head into advanced, and our chart of accounts is just here on the right hand side. So in here we can add, edit, really manipulate these chart of accounts to suit how we need it within Figured. As I mentioned, we do have a Figured chart of accounts that we can use if you want to. So that's available through the Help Center if you want to use that. But again, probably best you talk to your accountant before we do that. We'll have a look at the tracking options next. So that again is in accounting and advanced. And then we're looking here at our tracking categories. So in here, this is where we add tracking categories, and you can add 2 tracking categories in Xero. So here's my one I've got set up for my separate farms here. But if we wanted to set one up for our crops, we could call this enterprises or arable. And then in here, we would put our crops. So wheat 2021, barley, etc. So that's where we'd fill that out, and we can add plenty of in there, as many as you need. When it comes to adding the multi-farm feature, and if that's something you're looking at using, again, this is where we would add that in. You'd add a tracking category called farms, and then underneath that, you'd add all the enterprises you want to use, whether it be your different farms or your different enterprises like rentals or holiday lets or reusable energy, whatever that is. So again, that's within tracking categories here as well. Cool. So we'll dive from there. We'll head into the Figured product. So this is the page you'll land on when you first register for Figured and first log in. It's just your farms page. You're unlikely to have any farms in here unless you've already been in the product. So if you're wanting to create a farm, the button here is just create farm, and you'll just follow those steps to connect your Xero file, and then your farm will display in here once that's set up. We'll dive into my demo farm here. Cool. So this is the dashboard we'll land on in Figured. We are looking at just at actuals today, but as you can see in the graph here, we're tracking our actuals in our forecast line here. Obviously, this is just showing actuals for now. And then underneath that is our annual plan there, or our budget. But we'll dive straight into the trackers. So they're found under the operations tab here. And this is where we will be entering our on-farm production. So as I mentioned, we've got the milk tracker there, which is pretty straightforward. You're just really pulling across your milk income from Xero and then matching your milk production against that. This is an example of a generic tracker here. We've got a B&B pigs tracker here for tracking that, and we've also got a rental tracker here for our generic tracker, which we can just assign costs and income to produce that gross margin. We'll dive into the dairy cattle tracker. So I've got beef and dairy there, but so each of my enterprises will have a tracker there. So this is the example of a livestock tracker, just looking at our actuals here. So we've got the stock classes that you saw previously that I'm using here. And this is my stock rec as it stands today. So I've got my opening balance here. I've got my transactions throughout the year, my actual transactions, and then I've got my closing here. I'll just dive into the tracker settings to show you how it's set up. We did see it briefly earlier, but I'll just show you there's a few different options we've got in here. So there's an array of stock classes for each livestock tracker we've got. And then we've got these are our sales and purchase accounts that we saw earlier. So all of your Xero accounts will show in here, and we can assign those to the stock classes. And that will pull all the transactions through that account in Xero into our stock classes within Figured. We can set our payment terms in here as well. So the default is 2 weeks here that I've got set, but you can change that to be same day or anything, and that's to align our accrual and our cash dates for these transactions. So there's a couple of different ways to get our transactions in here. So as I mentioned, we can work through Xero or through Figured. This is an example of the warning you'll see if Xero's got a misaligned account with Figured, because this is our unreconciled accounts page, and this just shows where there's a difference between Xero and Figured. So in this instance, there's actually a difference. We've got a non-posted Xero transaction, so there's 5,000 sitting in Figured that's not yet in Xero. But likewise, if there was a transaction coming through from Xero that was not in Figured, this would show in here, and we just have to hop in here, add a transaction to reconcile those details. The way we enter transactions in from Figured through to Xero is we enter them in through up here. So obviously we've got forecasts and actuals in here as well. We're just touching on actuals today, but there's an array of different stock movements that we can put in here. So we've got, for the Figured transactions, we've got aging, burst, death, reconciliation, and then we've got inter-tracker transfers as well, which means if we want to transfer stock between our beef and our dairy trackers, or vice versa, we can move stock between them there. And then the sale and purchase transactions are the transactions that we'll be pushing through to Xero, given they're the ones with the financial quantities associated with them that we want to record in Xero. So as I mentioned, there's a lot more agri-specific information we can enter into these transactions here. So I'd pick my stock class. I can add my quantities in here for how many I'm selling in this instance. We can add weights in here as well, so either carcass or live weights. And we can then record a total here, whether it be per kilo or per head, depending on how you want to record it. We add our Xero contact in here too. We can adjust our sale and our payment dates. We can leave some notes against that transaction, and we can post that to Xero. This is where we would tick to post that transaction through to Xero, which creates that matching invoice. And we can attach files here as well. So if we wanted to attach our PDF invoice, or any other files which we want push through to Xero, we can attach those in here, and that will send through. The other thing to mention here is that we can also add non-stock lines to these transactions. So if you want to add any haulage costs or anything, we can add that in here as well. This is a list of our actual transactions that we've got in here as well, so we can see a breakdown of that. So keeping our stock rec up to date is really important for driving our livestock valuations. So it's important that we keep those transactions up to date. I'll just show you the stock balancer quickly while we're here as well. So the stock balancer is the reconciliation tool I mentioned earlier. So it's an actuals only tool. We'll view it in the monthly view here, so we can either do it annually or monthly. This is my dairy cattle. I've got my other livestock trackers in here too. But if I wanted to hop in at the end of the year and reconcile any transactions I had outstanding, I can enter my target closing in here. And then I just need to enter the reconciling transactions. So if I had some deaths throughout the year, I can hop in and enter those in the relevant months here, when those deaths were. Likewise with births, aging, and then also sales and purchases as well. Great for reconciling. I've got a transaction here that's unreconciled. So this is the transaction we saw earlier where we've got 5,000 figured and nothing in Xero. So we'd need to post a transaction through to Xero to match that. But likewise, if Figured will let you know if you've got any unreconciled accounts there, and we can hop in there and enter those transactions in. So a really handy tool for reconciling your stock and getting it to where it needs to be for driving those livestock valuations. The valuations are down in the accounting tab down here, and we've got management valuations and end of year valuations. So I'll touch on the end of year ones quickly while we're here. Pretty straightforward really. What we're doing is pulling the quantities from our trackers here. So this valuation's been locked for our 2021 season, but essentially you pull your quantities from your livestock tracker, allocate make sure the correct amount of stock are allocated here, assign a value to that, which is 0 in this example, but you can assign whatever value you want to there, and that will give you a total value for your herd there. So that's just your end of year valuations. Then we've also got management valuations in here. There's also a great webinar on this on our YouTube channel if you want to dig into this further. So we can either do a shared monthly value, meaning the value for each stock class doesn't fluctuate throughout the year. So we'd assign a value per head here, and that would not fluctuate throughout the year. But if we wanted to get really detailed, we could go different monthly values. And what that allows us to do is set a monthly value for each stock class. If we're rapidly growing our animals here, we might want to assign a different value on a monthly basis to each stock class, and then that our quantity is pulled through underneath there, so that will update our management valuations throughout the year, and then we can choose whether we want to include those in reports or not, and we can post these journals through to Xero too from here really quickly and easily. Save those and post them to Xero in order to keep Xero up to date and keep our management valuations up to date there. So that's the livestock tracker in a nutshell there, and how that works with the valuations. Moving on, we'll touch on the crop seasons now. So these are my crop seasons up here. I've grouped them by my harvest year. So I've got my 2021 years here. I've got oats, kale, and winter wheat in here. And you'll notice that for each of my crops, in each season, I've got my own tracker. So unlike the livestock trackers, for the arable trackers, I've got a single tracker for each crop type in each crop season. And the reason we do that is we really want to isolate the profitability of each crop. So these act as profit centers, essentially, working out the profitability of each crop. And then later on, that allows us to compare each crop. So each crop type in a particular season or across seasons, and each, the same crop types across different seasons as well. So that's why we set up a tracker for each individual crop. We've got some key KPIs up the top here. So this is our profit section here. What we're seeing here is our annual plan column, which is our budget. So this is our budgeted information here. This is our actual information, our actual in our forecast, but in this instance, as we're only viewing actuals, This is just actual information. And then we've got the variance between the two there. So really, we're doing really well compared to our budget there. This column is our market price column, and this is like a mini scenario within each of our crop seasons where we can say, if we adjust the market price, how does that affect our profitability in the long run? So really, really handy for creating those mini scenarios. On this side, we've got our production KPIs. So we've got the area that we've got for this particular crop. We've got the yield per hectare. We've got our total production here. And then here we've got what that production is being used for. So we've used 105 tonnes here. 100 tonnes have been sold. 5 tonnes have been used for feed. And then our unused, we've used 5 tonnes for seed again here. And then we've got over 1,000 tonnes here, which is still intended for sale, but yet to be sold. We've also got our break even over here as well. So here we can see the area that it's been assigned to. So I've got 3 fields here, and when we're assigning a field, we can use any fields that we've got on farm. These are my fields in this particular farm, and we can change the areas there if it's not exactly the effective area of the field. It might be more or less if need be. So that sets our area. So that's the first step in setting up a crop season. Then we move down to the harvest. So we'll record harvest for each product that we're getting out of a crop season. So in this instance, I'm getting wheat grain from my winter wheat, and I'm also getting some wheat straw there as well. We set it so we can have multiple harvests for each product. It doesn't just have to be on one harvest on the one date there. We've got our harvest date here, which is the first step to enter. We then enter our product, our estimated yield, or our actual yield in this instance that we're getting from our harvest, and then we'll get our total quantity from that as well, driven from obviously the area. We can break that down to field level if need be. If fields are having different yields or they're expected to have different yields, we can adjust that in there. And then down here, this is where we map out what we're intending to use that harvest for. So I'm intending to sell all of mine, but if I wanted to, I could hop in here and intend some of it for feed or intend some of it for seed. It just lets us know what we're using that for. That setting those harvests then drives our estimated income. So this is our estimated income in here. Up the top here where that's displayed is our estimated primary income is our primary product there, which is the wheat grain. And then our secondary income here is our wheat straw. This is our breakdown of cost and other income in here. So as I mentioned, a lot of this will come from Xero. So things like your drainage rates, that will typically come through your Xero. Your labor costs will typically come through Xero as well. And then things like diesel. So any sort of costs like that'll come through Xero, which would then in turn shows in the figured allocator, and we split that out to the relevant crop seasons. Again, we can tag those invoices in Xero with, if we've got the tracking option set up for winter wheat 21, we could tag these invoices in Xero with winter wheat 21 and set up a rule in the allocator which would automatically allocate these invoices into this crop season, meaning we don't have to manually do it. It's just already in here. But we can do that manually through the allocator as well. So a lot of these would have been put in here manually too. My seeds and my fertilizers will come from my product tracker, so my inventory, because they're inputs into our crop season that have got a quantity associated with it. So we'd typically run that quantity through the product tracker and then allocate that out to the relevant crop seasons, which would then show in here. So this is our breakdown of costs on an account level. We can also add transactions in through here as well, add harvest, obviously, add purchases of products, so purchases of inputs or any costs that we want to put in. We can create those invoices through Figured as well and push them through to Xero. We can create sales in here of our winter wheat too. which will then display it in our crop sales page, but also in our inventory tracker. And we can apply products from our inventory or our product tracker through here as well. And then again, we've got our use for feed function here as well for using some of that harvest for feed. We'll look at the product tracker next. So look at our inventory. So every farm can have a product tracker. Typically, it's used only for arable. So when you create an arable season, your product tracker will appear there. So don't panic if you don't see it there. And as soon as you create an arable season or a crop season, it will show up there. We've got all of our products that we've got on hand here. So my wheat grain, this is my harvested values here. I can see my average price per unit and the valuation that I've assigned to that harvest. And then that's shown here in the valuation column. We've also got our inputs here. So nitrogen fertilizers, I can see my purchase of that. And then I can see where I've applied some of that product as well. Some of the existing product that was already in there. I can see how much I've applied, on what dates. I can see the price per unit associated with that. And then I can see the total price here. And then we've obviously still got our valuation of what we've got on hand. So really handy for managing your inventory. You can see the movements of the stock in here as well, which is just really key for keeping an eye on what we've got, and for the accounting purposes, having a valuation of what we've got on hand, which then flows into our other areas of figured, like our financial position page, which is where we run our balance sheet out of down here. And so really important to keep this up to date. So that's the trackers in a nutshell. If you want to dig into it further, feel free to reach out to us for a chat. There's some great articles in the Help Centre as well, as I've mentioned. They go into more detail on these trackers, and also on the milk tracker and generic trackers, which we haven't gone into detail on. So feel free to check out that Help Centre. As I mentioned, it's available in the green bubble down here. You can search in here for the articles in here. And then also, if you want to just open up the Help Centre, it's in this question mark here and in the Help Centre. We'll dive into the Allocator next. So as I mentioned, the Allocator is a really, really powerful tool for driving our gross margin reporting and our cost of production reporting. So what we've got here is, on the left, we've got all our Xero transactions flowing through. So I can see I've got a lot of casual labour flowing through here from previous years. I've also got some feeds transactions flowing through here as well. And all of my Xero transactions there. You can filter by account here as well. So these are your Xero accounts. This is the status of the transactions, whether they've been allocated or dismissed. And then we've got dates as well to filter transactions between certain dates as well. So when we're manually allocating transactions, it's pretty straightforward. We can either dismiss a transaction. So important to note, dismissing a transaction doesn't remove it from a file, from your figured file. All it does is remove it from the allocator. So it will just show as either a general cost or a general other income. It just means we're not assigning that transaction to a particular enterprise, like our cattle or our crop seasons. So a lot of, the majority of your transactions, especially sort of administration costs, we'll probably want to dismiss a lot of those. But for things like labour that we might want to split out, we can choose to just allocate it to a particular enterprise, whether it be, one of our livestocks. We can allocate to obviously our generic trackers there as well. And we can allocate to our crop seasons, or a split between, or we can add as many allocations in here as we want. So we can split these out between multiple enterprises if need be. So this is how we'd manually do it. And we can distribute that equally, or by percentage, or by pound amount in there as well. So that's a manual allocation. The key thing for setting up automation in the Allocator is using allocation rules. So allocation rules are our automation feature in here. And this is really where we'd want to set up rules for probably the majority, 80% of your accounts or more, so that we don't have to go in and manually do a lot of that allocating. So as you can see, I've got a number of rules set up here. I've got rules set up for, I've got dismiss rules set up for my general administration costs that I don't want to allocate to an enterprise. So repairs and renewals. I've got bank loan interest, council tax, legal and professional, anything that doesn't, associate directly to an enterprise that we don't want to assign as a cost. We can just dismiss those. Any transactions that come from Xero, automatically dismissed. We don't see them in the allocator. So important to keep those dismiss rules updated and make sure your accounts are dismissing any of them, just to keep your allocator clear so you can see what you do need to allocate. Things like my foot trimming, for example, or my dairy expenses. I've got dairy minerals in here. Those sorts of things that we would want to allocate directly to the dairy cattle. So dairy levies, for example, I've got 100% of my dairy levies being allocated directly to my dairy cattle. So anything that comes through my dairy levies account here from Xero, automatically allocated to my dairy cattle. So we don't need to worry about that one. We also have the option of allocating by date range as well. So in my agri diesel here, this was for one of my crop seasons. I'm splitting all my agri diesel invoices at an 80-20% split between my winter wheat and my dairy cattle here, between these two date ranges. So really handy for seasonal farming, crop seasons as well. If you're wanting to allocate costs on a split between multiple crops, then you can set that up in here. So anything that comes through against that particular account, whether it be agri diesel or any other costs directly associated with those enterprises, we can set those date ranges, and anything between those date ranges will automatically be allocated. So those are the power of setting these rules. Obviously, we can dismiss historical information if we want to start from a certain date, dismiss by an account level, and allocate as well. The other thing to mention here is this is where we've set up our tracking options that we mentioned in Xero before. So if we wanted to set up our crops as a tracking option, this is where we'd set that up. So anything that would come through against our winter wheat 21, we would set that up as a tracking option in Xero. That would show in here. And then we can set that to automatically allocate to our winter wheat 21. So anything that comes through tagged with winter wheat 21 automatically allocates to that crop. So that's where the automation comes in. That's where tagging those invoices in Xero is really powerful to automate a lot of that. So really important to mention that in there as well. So that's allocation rules in there. You will have noticed that we have the option in here to allocate to field level as well. As I mentioned, just an option. But if you wanted to get into that level of detail, we can hop in here and allocate to a field level. So the default is by the field area. So it will split it by the area. In this case, they're all relatively similar, but you'll see that the split there is different. We can allocate equally between them, so a third each between these three fields, or we can do our own custom allocation. So look, we can really lean into the detail here if you want to. Again, you don't have to, and not everybody uses this by any stretch, but if you do want to lean into that detail, there is the option there to get into that level of detail and really get into the cost of production there and the gross margin reporting detail on a field level. Moving on from there, we'll look into the reports. So as I mentioned, and as you can see, there is an array of reports here in Figured. So we've got our financial reports up the top here, production reports here, and then we've got also some tracker reports down here, which are a little more specific to each enterprise. We're just going to be looking at the three main reports, or the three most popular reports in Figured today. So the profit and loss, the cash flow, and the variance. So we'll start with the profit and loss while we're here. Awesome. So this is our profit and loss report. Bear in mind, we are just running this on an actuals basis today, but we can run this on any period. Obviously, given it's our actuals, we're pulling this data from Xero. So we've got our 2021 year here, but we can run it for any year that we've got Xero information in there. We can run it for any month as well. We can also run a custom period too. So if we wanted to set our own periods for running that report, obviously, this is where we change what we're viewing. We're just going to view actuals today, but we can also view actuals and forecast and our snapshots there, which we'll touch on in later webinars. the other options we've got up here is we can actually run the P&L on a cash or an accrual basis. Typically, you'd be running that on an accrual and on the monthly level there. We can show quantities in here as well if we wanted to include quantities from our trackers. We'll just be showing totals today. And we can also run a comparison period in here as well. So if we wanted to add in another line under each of our lines here, we could add in a comparison period for last year's actuals, which would then give us both the view of our actuals from this year and then comparing our actuals to last year as well. So I can show you what that looks like in here as well. So this is just augmenting that information and taking a little while to run that. So you'll see that the reports are broken down here by enterprise. So I've got my beef cattle here, I've got my dairy cattle here, my winter wheat. This is the winter wheat 2021, and then we've got the winter wheat 2020 if there's some residual cost left over from the previous year. I've got my oats here, milk trackers. So all of your trackers here will be at the top. And then as we move down, we've got other income, direct costs, and then our operating expenses down here further. So this is all our reports are fairly similar in terms of the layout. We can collapse those to review it in a little bit more concise format. We can also share these reports out of here as well. So we can share them in PDF format. We can download them to CSV if we need to. And this is where we also save our reports as well. So if we wanted to save a report, we can then, it'll take a little while to store all that information away. Once it's saved, we can include it in report packs. So if we wanted to create report packs for, say, a board of directors, or if we wanted to create report packs for the bank or an accountant or anything, we can save our reports and include them in report packs. But we can also comment on our saved reports, as I mentioned earlier. So if you've got any numbers in here that you want to leave comments on, we can comment on these reports, save those comments, and then we can share these reports with anyone else as well, within the farming team or outside of it if need be. We can see who's seen it, and they can then again come to Figure and leave comments on these reports as well. Really stressing that collaboration feature that Figure has there. Cash flow report is the next one we'll have a look at. So this is viewing all of the cash transactions that are coming through from Xero, all of the cash side of it rather than the accrual. So we can again run any date range here that we've got Xero information for. We'll run actuals for today. Considering that's our focus, again we can run on a monthly or annual basis. And we can add comparison periods in there as well for the cash flow report again. So again, broken down exactly the same way as our P&L is, but obviously looking at the cash transactions here. Again, we can save and we can share and save those reports in here. I'll just show you what running a comparison line in here will do. This is showing our 2020 financial year in actuals here, and then we've got our actuals and forecasts in the comparison line, which we will see underneath once that data is being loaded in here. So you'll notice the blue lines here are the comparison that we're looking at. So we've got a comparison on obviously only the relevant data that was actually in our previous year or our comparison period. So if we move down to the milk, for example, we've got our actual milk for the 2020 season in here. And then in here, we've got our actuals for the 2021 season. So that's how adding the comparison line in there works. Again, we can choose to show our quantities in here if we want to. And also our operating surplus. If we want to only show our operating surplus in there, we can do that as well. We'll jump into the variance report quickly before we wrap up. So the variance can be run on profit basis or a cash flow basis. So we can run that on either. We can run any period again in here. And this is where the flexibility comes in. There's a lot of additional options in here that we can do. Again, we're comparing different periods. The snapshots and the forecast we'll touch on in the next webinars. So next Friday, if you're wanting to join us, we'll touch on those. But if we're looking at in here, we can compare our actuals year to date versus any forecast snapshots we've got, or more commonly, and for this example, we'll use actuals versus actuals year to date versus our last year's actuals year to date as well. Obviously, we can include multiple options in here if we want to, and we can also consolidate trackers similar as we could in the other reports. We can show quantities, variance percentages. And so there's a lot of additional options in here that we can show. The variance report's our most commonly used report around the world, and it's just really handy for tracking your progress, tracking yourself against budgets, tracking yourself against your last year's or previous years. So there's a lot of really key information you can get out of here. So here we're seeing our variance between our actual, which is this year, and then our last year's actual. So we've also got our quantities included in here in the line underneath as well. Bear in mind this is a demo file. So, and we can choose whether or not we want to include our harvest values in here. Obviously, harvest is a figured only actual, because Xero won't hold a harvest value given it's not a financial sum until the harvest has been sold. But we can, if we want to include our harvest values, we can include that in here as well. So that's the variance report. Again, really, really great one to explore yourself. Especially with your own information, so that you recognize it, but lots of different options in here, and a really key report. So that just about wraps up our look at the now aspect of Figured. So we've covered the actual side of Figured. We're getting a really good sort of picture of where the business is at the moment, looking at our trackers here to track our production and include those actuals coming from Xero, merging that with our production and Figured to generate our a picture of what we're producing and what it's costing us to produce it. We looked at the allocator as well, so allocating those costs from Xero, splitting them out between enterprises, or automatically allocating them to our enterprises. And we've looked at reports too. So we looked at the three main reports, the profit and loss, cash flow, and variance. And that paints the picture of our actual position, or our current position, or the now, as we call it. So from once we've got this now basis set up on the now picture, that's where we then move on to look at the where we want to be in 5 to 10 years, and then beyond that, how we're going to get there. So I'll open the floor up to any questions. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A. Really, happy to answer anything you've got now. Obviously, I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, so if you do have any questions that you want answered afterwards, or at any point, as I mentioned, reach out through that little green bubble in the bottom corner there. There's always someone on the other end of that to help you out. Check out the Help Center as well. Great articles in there on using the features of Figured. And burning, if you've got any burning questions there, that is the best place to go. We've got a couple of questions coming in here. So, can you create report packs? Yes, you can create report packs. So I'll bring my screen up again just to show you how that works. So back into the report section here. So you'll notice these are my saved reports here, and I can jump into these reports, leave comments on them, annotations. If I want to create a report pack, I need to have my report saved in here. And then we hop into the groups function here of the saved reports. This is where we can create, I've got a few pre-saved ones in here. So board packs, reports that I want to share with my bank. But I can hop in here, create a report pack, call it whatever I want. Again, this might be Q1 report pack for bank. Leave a little description in here about that report, what it includes, which we'll show when we share it. And then we can just select what reports we want to use, whether it be any of our financial reports or our production reports or anything. And if we need to, we can open those reports up in here and have a look at them, leave comments on them if we want to. This is the report I've just done. So that is how we create report packs. Really, really handy for, as I said, sharing with anyone in the farming team, and really stressing that collaboration feature. Another thing while we're on collaboration that I will mention, if you didn't already know, is we can invite anyone into the farm that we want. There is no limit on who we can invite. It's just in access and security in settings here. Hop in here, enter the email of whoever you want to invite. There's you can give them their own level of permissions, so they might just have view-only permissions if you don't want them editing your information. So really, really, again, bringing in the whole farming team, which is sort of Figured's ethos there, is bringing in that whole team, getting them collaborating on that one set of data there. Any further questions coming through? Looks pretty quiet. That's all right. It is Friday morning, and it's fair enough. So we'll leave it at that. If you do have any questions, as I said, feel free to reach out. We do have another question coming through here. Yes, another one on inviting people into the farm. Anyone you want, you can invite into that farm. So through that People's tab, through that People's section there, you just need their email address. They get invited in, and then they can, yeah, you can assign them a permission level there. So they might have view only, they might have admin access, so they can do whatever they want in the file. There's a great help center article on setting those up. What else have we got here? I've just imported my chart of accounts. Is there a way to quickly recode my Xero transactions? There is. So in Xero, there is a find and recode feature, which again, I will quickly show you. 1 second. Oh, there we go. Sorry, took a moment to load there. So in accounting here, again, under the tab here, we have find and recode here, or in advanced, we have find and recode. So this is where we're fixing multiple transactions at once. Really, really handy for if you've changed your chart of accounts and you need to adjust those. I haven't done any recoding in mine, but this is where we would do that. So we can use the find and recode function to edit out of transactions, move them into different codes, different accounts, in order to get Figured looking right. So that's a really common tool that's used. Great Xero help articles on that. If you need to use it, there's a Xero help center as well. Really encourage you to use that. Really, really helpful for learning how to use some of these features too. So we're all dry on the questions this morning, more or less. So we will leave it at that. Again, any questions, use that chat bubble, and one of us is always on the end to answer that. This webinar will be available for viewing afterwards if you want to refer back to it. So that's hopefully that's handy for you, and feel free to share it around to anyone else if they also want to check it out. Thanks for joining me this morning, and join us next Friday as well, where we dig into the next step in the now, where we're looking at the where. Exciting. All right, thanks guys. Thanks for joining me. Cheers.